welcome back. It's time for the Western Flyer Update. Man, I never get tired of that opening sequence. The house getting lifted up off the deck of the boat. That's an incredible time lapse. I actually have it on my desktop at home, and I just gotta click on it every once in a while, and I watch it through. That was shot back in February of 2019, just about 14 months ago. And people are constantly commenting, emailing, comment box, whatever happened to the house? Did it get rebuilt? Did you throw it away? Thought you were going to have two crews, one on the house and one on the main hull. And that's pretty much what happened over the last year. Most of the energy was put towards the hull. The framing, the planking, that stern, that stem, all that work that went into rebuilding the hull. But some work did get done on the house over the last year and a quarter. Pete Russ, Lee O'Connor, and Brian Wenzel, they got the front of the house rebuilt, they got the cabin top back on the house, and Lee did quite a lot of finish work on the interior before the whole project got put on hold. So this episode is just going to be checking in on what got done on the house over the last year and a quarter. But before we take off, I want to answer a question that came in on the last couple of video comment boxes. What's all that stuff behind you? I've been shooting these videos, you could probably hear the birds outside here, just in my yard on Marrowstone Island. And this is actually the original boat, or a lot of the parts and pieces. We saved everything. We saved the stem, we saved stern lifts, we saved deck beams, planking, framing, everything. And some of it got used, some of it goes to Ventana, if you saw last week's episode. Some of it's been going to donors around the country and around the world, actually. And some of it, we just don't know what's going to happen to it. But once it's gone forever. So we're just saving everything for now. I got a couple of containers, and I got a nice big pile of parts and pieces. But let's dive into this episode.
See the Lazy Susan we got for the planer? That's fucking awesome.
Before we get too far into this episode, I want to back up a few steps, particularly if you haven't seen some of the earlier episodes in this series. The house on the Flyer was removed from the deck in February of 2019. The decision to remove the house was pretty straightforward. Once we got up underneath that deck structure and we noticed that water had been getting in from above over the years, it started to compromise the athwartship deck beams, it was pretty clear that the house would need to be removed. To remove the house safely from the deck, Pete would have to have a spreader bar engineered and built out of steel. The one he had built had 4 long legs that reached down each side of the house all the way down to the sill timber. Once the house was freed from the deck, it could easily be lifted off using the overhead bridge crane. With the house safely off the deck, Pete's first big task would be to rebuild the front of the house. The front of any wheelhouse takes a lot of abuse. Wind, rain, and the constant pounding of waves. They always seem to have a lot of trouble, and this house had no exception. Pete would have to remove and replace the entire forward sill timber. The original sill was built out of a large Douglas fir timber and cut to shape.
Well, the reason it's in 2, the benefit of it being in 2 is that it really takes the camber out because it's really mellow when you put 2 short ones like that. So,
There's almost no camber.
It is. It's really, it's basically flat.
Right.
And they just kind of planed off the deck parts and half planed this and half planed that.
We weren't able to source an adequate replacement timber in Douglas fir, so Pete opted to laminate the replacement out of 2-inch seep oak and then cut the final shape out on the large bandsaw.
Yeah, that's pretty much just one all the way out. Turn the dust on.
wheelhouse on a fish boat is built very similar to a wall in a standard home. It has a bottom plate, which we call a sill timber. It has vertical studs and a top plate. It has outer sheathing and inner sheathing. And the whole thing is held down to the deck with a combination of carriage bolts and long tie rod bolts.
I always contend that the house sill is about the hardest piece on the whole boat to build.
These pieces are pretty weird.
They're pretty weird. It's like there's something about it. There's so many things going on.
They would be a little easier if I wasn't trying to make those posts match them.
Right.
I'd have a little more. I'd have a
little
little
more
more
freedom.
leeway.
Right. But they're still really complex. They got a weird rolling bevel.
With
They got
camber in the bottom.
Yeah.
And then half laps that somehow need to.
Actually fit.
Yeah. See how they fit.
Oh, there you go. You just bumped it back.
Pretty good. This is pretty cooked off. See what it feels like when I get to the bottom. What are the odds that both these are actually the same? You know what was really weird was that when I put this pattern, I took the pattern off the other side, and when I put it on this side, it's like exact. It's going away.
Alright, that's gonna. Oh, it doesn't fit. It's alright.
With the structural repairs done, the next major step would be to cover the forward face of the house with 2 layers of thin plywood. Once that was done, Brian milled out and installed the layer of 3/4-inch red cedar tongue and groove. Brian opted to run a small bead of Sikaflex down each seam, adding a little bit of structure and quite a lot of weatherproofing. Once the outer skin was installed on the front of the house, Brian turned his attention to prepping and painting all of the overhead beams. Starting from a bare wood surface, Brian applied 2 coats of enamel, followed by 2 coats of semi-gloss enamel top coat. sanding between each coat as he went.
Well, we got 4 coats of paint on those things.
The last major push of woodworking on the house was to install a layer of 1 1/8" Douglas fir tongue and groove on the cabin top, followed up by 2 layers of 1/4" plywood and a layer of 5-ounce Dynel cloth saturated in epoxy.
Diesel enamel. That's cool. By the oxbow.
The approach to the house repair was quite a bit different than the hull. In the hull repair, the standard to replace the timber was quite low. If the original timber wouldn't last at least 40 to 50 years, it was replaced. In the house, the approach is to preserve as much of the original as possible, integrating new timbers with old. When the house is completed and reinstalled in the boat, over 80% of it will be original.
I know they started getting the Carlisle. Let's see that. But so far, that's been the only one. Thank you.
The 2 layers of plywood were glued and screwed down to the tongue and groove surface, and then the entire thing was covered over with that 5-ounce Dynel cloth. We really like using the Dynel cloth as opposed to a 10-ounce fiberglass cloth, because if you don't fuss with the wetted surface, the dried surface will easily pass as a traditional canvas. Over the last year, there's been quite a lot of interior woodwork done, but I'm going to save that for a future episode. That's it for this week's episode on the Western Flyer restoration. I had a blast putting this one together. Going back through old camera cards, going to the external hard drive, kind of digging up footage wherever I could. That was almost 16 months of kind of footage from everywhere, and I had a great time putting it together. But until next week, thanks for watching.